This is the 200th episode of Back to One. If you're enjoying this podcast, please leave a review on your favorite podcast app. If you're not enjoying this podcast, please email me at backtooonepodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you.
Talent isn't the thing that counts. What counts is tenacity and perseverance, hanging in there, staying in there, not giving up. You know, if we were going to take the fact that we die eventually as an ultimate failure, then we wouldn't be able to do anything with our lives. But we have to live as if there is no death.
Filmmaker Magazine presents Back to One with Peter Rinaldi.
André Gregory is a shaman. He sat down with me in cyberspace to talk about the work. You've talked about how My Dinner with André is a really pivotal project in your career for a number of reasons. Is it true that one of the reasons is that because it was essentially the first time you were acting on film, that experience kind of changed your way of approaching performance in general, striving toward a more simplicity in acting?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't know where I said that, but I may well have said it. But I had liked simplicity in acting for a long, long time before My Dinner with André. And one of the reasons that we always performed in very small spaces, for an audience of around 20 or 30, was because then you don't have to act. You don't have to do. You can just be.
Yeah.
And you can simply be. And in the simplicity of being, the audience senses just the tip of the iceberg of the conscious part of the deep unconscious of the actor. And probably if I weren't the kind of person that had trouble screwing a light bulb in, I would have become a film director. But since technology is completely out of my, I just can't deal with it. I did theater, but I was looking for an acting that had the simplicity of film acting.
Mm-hmm.
But that was before My Dinner with André.
Interesting. I didn't know that like stuff like Alice was done on such a small scale like that. I thought that was more of a theatrical space.
It was a very theatrical performance, but in a very small
space. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. In fact, after we'd been performing Alice for about 5 years, my agent, an extraordinarily colorful character, brought an Indian gentleman to see the performance. And he said to me, "Oh, very interesting, very, very interesting. Such theatricality, very, very interesting. But tell me, why is the performance so noisy?" That one question affected my work for the next 30 years.
Wow. One of the truly inspiring things about your book is reading how much you failed especially as a young person. I mean, so much, like an absurd amount of failure that never ever got to you. It not only didn't do you in, you also never compromised.
My wife, Cindy, took a workshop with a very fine painter who only illustrated her work with the paintings that didn't work. I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think I used the word failure in the book. There was some very famous anthropologist, a woman, who was married, I think, something like 9 times. And some interviewer said to her, why did those marriages keep failing? And she said, oh, they didn't fail. None of them were a failure.
Mm-hmm.
They were all successes. I think there's a wonderful book, Truffaut's book on Hitchcock,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is one of the best books on the creative process I've ever read.
Yes.
And at what Truffaut, the French director, interviews Hitchcock after watching each of his movies, I think half a dozen times. And for one of the movies, Truffaut says to Hitchcock, so that film did very badly at the box office, right? And Hitchcock said, oh yeah, it did terribly at the box office. And was it a critic, or did it do badly critically? And Hitchcock said, oh, the critics hated it. And Truffaut said, so if it lost its money and the critics hated it and the audience hated it, I guess it was a failure. And Hitchcock said, oh no, it wasn't a failure. You remember the scene of the milk glass coming down the staircase with the moonlight coming through it? That shot taught me how to do my next movie.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think we should think in terms of failure.
I guess I mean that, like, you were fired 3 times in a row, one of the times like let out by police. Like that would do another person in. They would just go and do something else after the third time.
I don't know where I got that. It was a kind of stubborn, optimistic tenacity.
Yeah.
It just kept me going. Every acting teacher, when I was an acting student, kicked me out of acting. You were
kicked out by the great acting teachers of the century. You went one by one.
Right. So why did I keep bouncing back? Well, there's a lesson in that. There is an important lesson. People always talk about talent. Grotowski said there is no such thing as talent. There's only lack of talent. Talent isn't the thing that counts. What counts is tenacity and perseverance, hanging in there, staying in there, not giving up. If we were going to take the fact that we die eventually as an ultimate failure, then we wouldn't be able to do anything with our lives. But we have to live as if there is no death, even though we know there is.
Why did you only have one line in your book about the last temptation of Christ? I feel like that performance was so amazing. It was one of the highlights of that film.
There's probably only one sentence because the book is basically about a theater director, not a film director. Right. So it goes much more into my theater work than my film work. But when I was preparing John the Baptist, an awful lot went into the character of John the Baptist. If you're playing a character like Christ or John the Baptist, it's so easy to fall into cliches of a biblical character.
Well, your wife made a wonderful documentary about you called André Gregory Before and After Dinner. It's really, really great. And in it, there's a scene where you're telling the story of the audition. You auditioned for Scorsese. And it's an amazing story. It involves nudity and kind of insanity. I don't want to ruin it. But then your wife finds the tape. And we were about to see the tape. And I'm getting really excited. I'm like, oh my God, she found the tape. And we see the tape, and it's nothing like the story you told. It just seems like a normal audition. And we never hear from you again to say why you told that story that was obviously not true. And I always wanted to ask you, like, what's the deal? What's the deal with that?
In the story, I say that when I auditioned for Scorsese, he said to me, I see John the Baptist as a shaman. Do you know anything about shamans? And I said, well, if you could give me about 15 minutes of privacy, I think I could show you a shaman. And when he came back in, I was stark naked, weaving and chanting and howling. There's no truth to that story. There was. I thought that's the way it happened. But Cindy, my wife, looking over a tape she found of the audition, found that that wasn't the audition at all. But you see that says something about how we tell stories, that storytelling is not documenting. It's creating a story based on what you think might have happened, but didn't necessarily. So it didn't seem to us to make any difference whether I actually did the audition naked or didn't. The important thing is the story.
Yeah.
And the other important thing is that the audience not know whether that story was true or false, so they can make up their own minds about it.
See, I believe it happened on another plane.
Could have.
I mean, it made me want to, I mean, I'm glad I listened to your book before I heard that story, though, because I would have thought, well, how are any of these stories real? Did he really get buried at Richard Avedon's yard? All these amazing stories.
But that's the way stories work. I was never married in Richard Avedon's yard.
No, buried.
Oh, buried.
Yeah.
Buried. I was buried. That's true. That did happen.
I wasn't married, but I was buried. Yes,
I was buried. Yep, that's true. But see, that's there's a passive theater and an active theater, or a passive filmmaking and an active filmmaking. The passive one tells you what to think, how to feel, what to believe really happened. But in life, we don't necessarily know that. So an active theater, an active filmmaking is one that makes you, the audience, into an active participant who's not being told what to think and feel, but can make up their own mind based on the evidence. Mm-hmm. So it activates your mind. That's the heart of my Dinner with André. People often say, how could you possibly make a movie where two guys sit and only talk? That doesn't happen. There's storytelling there. You hear amazing stories about going into the Sahara on a camel, being buried alive in Montauk, and you, each single different member of the audience, you see it and visualize it in your own mind. So in fact, my Dinner with André is a bigger and more theatrical film than Lawrence of Arabia.
And it's certainly, to me, because I just saw it again, more exciting than the Marvel movies that I can't get through, that I find so boring. You know, I don't know if people can really believe that. It's true for me. Like this last viewing of my Dinner with André flew by in such a way. And you're totally right about that.
Well, see, also a work of art, which I think my Dinner with André is, as well as an entertaining film, a work of art exists on many, many different levels because it connects with the unconscious of the creators. Wally and I did not know consciously when we made that film or wrote that film that we were writing about our own fears of fascism coming to America. The film is permeated with imagery of fascism, the Nazis. Mm-hmm. Now, at the time, it just seemed funny. It seemed as if André had a bug in his brain about fascism. But in fact, I think artists, because they can see the present with clarity, can have some clarity about what's just around the corner. And we saw in some way, based on what we saw in the streets in the late 70s, we saw what was going to be in the streets in the 2000s. And it wasn't pretty. It was DeSantis, it was Trump, it was QAnon, it was January 6th. It was a disgusting, frightening, anti-gay, anti-woman, anti-freedom movement that was coming to the United States. And I don't think we're out of it yet. You know, what seems to be coming down the pike is very scary. I do think we have to be careful about seeing Trump as the cause of everything that's going on. America carpet bombed Dresden. America dropped 2 atom bombs. You know, we keep saying, oh my God, what would happen if Russia dropped a bomb? We've already dropped bombs. We had already spent years killing the people of Vietnam and Iraq and Afghanistan. So when Eisenhower, in his last days, warned about the power of the military-industrial complex, he was talking about, as the president of the United States, who knew what was going on. And I don't think we should fool ourselves into thinking that we are the pristine country of George Washington that was destroyed by Donald Trump. Yes. I think we have looked away from evil in our own culture, in our own society. We have been unwilling to see our own complicity in destroying the Palestinians, the Iraqis. Our hands are not clean.
I want to just talk about a few aspects of your work that you've been doing over the last 30 years. I just want to start with a quote. But actually, before I do that, let me just, if people don't know, and you can correct me, you spend a lot of time, much more than a normal theater production would spend on each production. The last one, Master Builder, I think it was 14 years.
We rehearsed for 14 years.
Rehearsed for 14 years.
On and off all the time.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Vanya was, 4 or 5 years. Those two were lucky enough to have films be made of them, and we're able to see them, of those of us who weren't able to, see it live. Here's a quote about the time aspect from you. We think we know who these characters are, but we don't. We think we know what the play is saying, but we don't. Over time, there's too much below the surface. Over time, we break through the surface to reveal what's underneath. There's always so much more there, more that emerges over time. Explain to me, though, for instance, why Vanya ended at the 4-year mark or whatever, but Master Builder took 14 years. I mean, obviously, if Vanya kept going, it would have kept evolving, right? If we're living by about time showing us things about the project that we didn't know.
Yeah, I know, because I'm a painter, that at a certain point I say, oh, it's finished. I can't see how I would erase anything else, or how I would make another line, how I would choose another color. So I think you could say, after 14 years of Master Builder, we had to say, oh, that's it. That's what we know about this play and about ourselves in relation to this play at this moment of history. Yes, if we grew more, if we changed more, if we spent more time, we could have rehearsed even longer. It's not thought of as strange In, say, writing, Proust takes his entire life to write his book. It's only in theater, which, is governed by economic factors. If you only have so much money, you have to open by a certain date. And if you don't think you've reached some kind of recognition, you fake it. That's show business. So if there are no economic restrictions, and often there were not economic restrictions because we just worked for the love of working and the passion of developing the work, then you don't have to reach a quick solution. If you go into a psychoanalysis, look how many years you have to spend to just discover a tiny bit.
That's true.
Just a tiny bit.
Yes.
Because the search, the process of seeking is a long one.
And that's such an interesting analogy because of the other aspect that's so unique about your work, which is that you don't talk to the actors about the work, right? Generally.
Right.
And you said there's two reasons for that. You never talk about the play because you don't trust the mind. That was one thing you said. And then you find that language is misleading.
Right.
And those two things really fascinate me because I think this is where my fear of directing has developed, which is that I have seen how something that you say as the director or just the observer of the actor can change the actor so much.
Oh, absolutely. I was performing in, what is that great Ibsen play? The one where the woman leaves the man at the end.
Doll's House.
Doll's House.
Yeah.
I was rehearsing Doll's House as an actor. And one day the director said to me, do you think you could make the character a little more masculine? Well, that's absolutely the wrong thing to say to an actor. So I started playing him as a raging queen and never went back. It was my sweet revenge. I never went back. As a lesson to her, to not say something so dumb. So when you talk to the actor, you have to talk to the actor with love and attention and care, choosing your words very, very carefully, because words are slippery.
Yes.
If you're in a classical Freudian analysis, the shrink almost never says anything.
Yes. That's why I thought it was a great analogy you made when you said that, it could take years in therapy to have a breakthrough. And it takes years in your work for maybe an actor to have a breakthrough. But they're not getting the breakthrough from you in a way. Maybe another actor might get a breakthrough from a director, quote unquote breakthrough, if they have to get to a result place really fast in a traditional play.
Yeah, because nothing means more to an actor than finding the solution herself.
Right.
And it's never forgotten.
It's not. It's not only not forgotten, right? It's really powerful for the audience somehow,
yeah.
Right? When they do it.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is. Do you know what that is? Why is that so?
I don't know. Do you know that somebody once tried to kill Samuel Beckett in a street in Paris? Tried to knife him, and the guy was sent to prison. And Beckett went to visit him. And he said to the guy, why did you try to kill me? And the guy said, I don't know.
What did you mean by you can't trust the mind?
Well, look at the good minds, Russian and American, that are ripping Ukraine to bits. Those are good minds.
Right.
They went to good universities. They were well trained. But look at what they do. I once I once went to the Galapagos Islands, and I was walking on one of the beaches, and there were these huge sea lions kind of basking in the sun. And I thought, well, they don't have minds, but they don't know about death. So not having a mind is not necessarily a bad thing. Germany created one of the most horrific events of all time, the killing of the Jews. Those were good minds. The Germans were cultivated. They went to good schools.
Right.
How do we explain that? Maybe the mind is not as great an asset as we think. It's imprecise. I think we can always go by our gut, but I don't think we can necessarily go by our minds. The mind in the theatrical process is very, very good for the last stage, for editing, cleaning, swiping, choosing. But in the long process of the work, I don't think the mind is that reliable.
So if I was going to put together, like, okay, so 14 years, sometimes the director doesn't really talk to the actors. So then you'd be like, well, what is he doing? Well, when you look into it, though, you hear somebody like Jonathan Demme talking about it. He witnessed, Master Builder. He came and he said, there's this kind of energy field that you created between yourself and the actors. The actors feel this encouragement from you. And Julie Haggerty said, your actor in Master Builder, she said, it's like he's inside me. And then here's a quote from you. When I watch actors rehearse, I concentrate so intensely on each actor that there is total inner silence. I don't locate the center of being in any particular moment of rehearsal, this person or that event. I don't concentrate or focus on myself. All my concentration is on the actors. So we're lucky enough to have a document in your wife's wonderful documentary of you directing a Master Builder, and you can see you there, and your hand is shaking as you're. It's almost like you're. It's almost like a water like a water stick.
Dousing.
Yes, dowsing rod. Yes. You're doing something on another level with these folks. But tell me if I'm going too far with that. It's not just that you're present. It's not just that you're attentive. I would say you're doing something else with them every single time you're there, and it's affecting them. But talk to me about what it is that you're actually doing and how it works for them.
What you're asking is not really that mysterious. It just sounds mysterious when it's applied to theater. Because in theater, generally, the director is saying, turn now, go up to the table now, say that a little faster. But if you want to know really what the process is, go watch Simon Rattle conducting the Vienna or Berlin Philharmonic. What's he actually doing? He's not talking, or he talks very little. He certainly, yeah.
Well, if you were raising your hands and having them raise their voice, or showing them how to move by your movement, I mean, that's what a conductor is doing. Am I wrong? Like, there's something about the movement of the wand that is literally affecting the sound. You don't do that.
No, I do it in a different way.
It's some other energy thing. I mean, am I crazy?
Well, it is an energy thing. I'm a shaman, as Scorsese could say. There is a shamanic energy that is going out to the actors. I don't know how it goes out, how I summon it, how I'm sending it forth. My job, well, somebody once was talking about how talented I was. And I said, no, I'm not really talented. I'm just cleaning an antenna, which is connected to outer space. Mm-hmm. My job is to clean the antenna. In other words, that my intentions and my motivations be as pure as possible. Yes. So the message can come in from outer space.
Yes, yes, I get that. So taking it from this Indian man saying it's very loud, and you spending 30 years on that comment, simplifying things. If I'm using the wrong words, stop me. The simplification of the work, the stripping away. There's a quote. You say, you're not adding to a performance. You're stripping away less and less and less and less. So quite literally, you don't need lights. You don't need set decoration. You've got to the point where you don't need a stage. The only thing you need, the only thing that's always been constant, it seems, is you. They never did it without you.
Right.
And I don't believe this, but some say that there may come a time when, you're not around. I don't believe that. I don't believe in something like that.
I hope you're right.
But let's just play devil's advocate. There is a time when you're not around. How does this work continue without you?
It doesn't.
You mean no one else can do this with them?
No. When the work doesn't go on, it doesn't go on.
Is this something you can pass on, I guess is what I'm saying? Can you pass on this work to somebody else? The work that you do?
No, the work can't be passed on. There are 3 films, The Master Builder, Vanya, and My Dinner with André. You could learn something from looking at those films, but I don't think work should be passed on. I think we each find it out of our own self, out of the time in which we're living. If I were directing a play while the war is going on in Ukraine, it would be different. I don't believe in methods.
Yes. If somebody showed up at your door in a way kind of like that you showed up at, Grotowski's door, wouldn't you take the person in and teach the way, Grotowski taught you?
It depends on the nature of the person who shows up at the door. There would be some people I wouldn't want to teach, or there'd be some people I didn't think I could teach.
Right.
As far as the passing down goes, there was never a more precise person in his teachings than Grotowski. He wrote one of the great theater books. Can his message be passed down? I don't think so. Mm-hmm. I think what can be passed down is his passion, his love of the theater, his devotion to exploration. But the work, I don't think should be passed down. Each work is individual. Can you pass down the work of Jackson Pollock or Picasso? I don't think so.
Right. I was shooting a documentary last year. I think it was the end of last year, and with your friend Tom Hurwitz. And he said he goes on a walk with you up at the Cape every morning, and you guys tell each other stories. And I became jealous about that for a second. But then I thought, well, are any of these stories not in André's book? And then I thought, well, this is a great idea for a sequel to your book. Your book is called This Is Not My Memoir. I think a sequel should be called This Is My Memoir.
Maybe.
You have more stories, right? That are not in the book.
Many, many stories, yeah. Well, the stories, There are lots of stories in my Dinner with André, of course. That's not the main story. The main story is a story about men. One man who hides behind words and another man who hides behind silence. They're just a couple of pathetic men. And over the process of trying to connect with each other or evading each other, they create a relationship that is quite loving by the end. That's the story. The story is not the stories. The stories in my Dinner with André are the icing on the cake. They're what suck you in. Just as in my book, This Is Not My Memoir, the stories are the entertainment, but they're not the main fight, as it were. The main event is an angry, alienated, insecure young man, unable to love, afraid of loving, who over the process of a lifetime learns to love. That's the story, not the stories. Yes. The stories are fun. The stories are entertaining. The stories are kind of wondrous, but that's not the main event.
Yes. What is your hope for the future of, I don't even want to call it theater, because there's too much with that word. What is your hope for the future of performance?
I would hope for truth.
Yes. André Gregory, thank you so much.
Well, it's been a pleasure meeting you.
Back to One is a production of Filmmaker Magazine, which is a publication of The Gotham, formerly IFP. Listen to back episodes of this podcast at filmmakermagazine.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Are you still working on Hedda Gabler?
No.
Is it because of the pandemic?
No, not really. I kind of painted myself into a corner. There were too many actors. There were 8 characters, I think. And trying to,
schedule.
Yeah, it's impossible. This one's in LA, that one's in Belgrade. I just couldn't pull off the logistics of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, are you going to start up something else?
Oh, I don't know.
Well, why wouldn't you? You're loving painting too much?
Well, I certainly love painting.
But, I mean, we need you to do what you do.
That's certainly very kind of you. But, one production more or less won't make that much difference.
True.